Okay, I'd like to welcome you all here to our ICTAS review. Today we're going to be looking at contributions from the Sustainable Water Thrust and the Sustainable Energy Thrust. This is the first year that we've been doing these reviews, and I've been so excited to see the tremendous research coming out of the laboratories, folks associated with ICTAS. This gives us the opportunity to perhaps foster new collaborations, let others know the type of activities going on in our thrusts that ICTAS supports. I'm looking forward to another great series of presentations. I'll let Mark, you're going to start this off, I guess.
Sure, thank you. I'm just going to make some opening remarks about the Sustainable Water Thrust area. Of course, we all know that water is a critical issue, and at Virginia Tech we have expertise and major emphases looking at water and energy, sustainable water and societies, water and health, and urban watersheds. And when ROOP first started thinking about having a sustainable water thrust area at Tech and bringing together the roughly 100 faculty working largely in isolation at different pockets of the university, we had the endorsement of the National Academy study on grand challenges for the next century, in which sustainable water was identified as 2 of 14 critical problems that needed to be solved in the context of infrastructure and access. And ROOP also had identified that the Smalley Institute and other think tanks had identified water and energy as amongst the foremost problems that we have to solve in the next 50 years to serve mankind. And as we saw from our New Horizons series and the presentations, Jerry Schnorr came in, what we learned is that you really can't get to energy without water, especially with revolutionary hydrofracking and other procedures. Water is energy, energy is water. And you don't have to look very far to find daily reminders of just how important water is and how exciting the future looks in terms of studying water issues. So for example, I'm just taking 2 features, one of which was from National Geographic in January and February of this year, which again highlighted this issue that water demand across the U.S. Just to extract energy resources is predicted to double by 2035. And in February of this year, we had a very visible example of our decaying infrastructure in the U.S. The fact that leaking water pipes caused a sinkhole was nothing really remarkable, but what was interesting, in this case Harrisburg, was the city doesn't have money to fix these potholes, these sinkholes that develop, much less fix the pipes that are causing the sinkholes. So this is really illustrating just how resources, financial resources, and our needs to improve our infrastructure are going to collide here very, very quickly. So we've been overseeing this investment now, both Dr. Pruden in terms of her leadership and myself, and also our leadership panel, Andre Dietrich, Steve Schoenholz, Cully Hession, John Little, and with the great help of Jeff Beebe from ICTAS. Over the last few years, we've identified 3 sub-emphasis areas in sustainable water. Of course, SWIM, which has been led by Sunil Sinha. It's been very successful. Water and Health, led by Dr. Dietrich. And sustainable watersheds and ecosystems with great input from Glenn, Cully, and Steve. We've roughly invested our resources that we've had at our discretion, 20% into SWIM, 20% into water and health, and 60% into sustainable watersheds and ecosystems. So with that, I think that gives you an idea of the overall direction of our thrust area, and we'll shift gears now to Eric, who's going to talk about the mesocosm work that we're investing in.
Okay. Good morning. And my name is Eric Hester. I am the PI on this equipment grant. It's we requested funds to purchase 2 what they call drainage and seepage tanks from Gunn, a German company, and I'll be referring to these as mesocosms, and I'll show you a picture of those in a minute. But first I wanted to back up and kind of explain what the rationale for requesting these was in the first place. Okay, so the basic area of interest is using natural processes to remediate contaminated or polluted waters. Over the last couple of decades, it's been clear that a lot of the active treatments like pump and treat and other things to improve groundwater conditions, and this is also true for surface water, are very expensive and are not very good at removing sort of the lower level contaminants in the environment. At the same time, there's these kind of hot spots on the landscape where natural processes can really kind of accelerate those degradation processes. But where and when this happens, and these things are kind of shifting around the landscape at different times, it has been hard to tease out at times, and so there's a lot unknown about that. So specifically, this project is interested in the groundwater piece of that, and if you look at contaminant plume here heading towards a river, and then a lot of times you get no degradation of contaminants at all in the upgradient plume, then it hits that river, and you've got this mixing here with surface water, and in that mixing zone there's considerable potential for a lot more reaction relative to the surface water above and the deeper groundwater, but exactly where and when that happens is not very well understood, primarily because it depends on the hydrologic flow paths and the mixing in there, and there's been pretty much no research at all on either in the field, in the laboratory, or even in modeling to look at this mixing dependent reactions. Okay, and I just want to mention we got some other studies recently going on in addition to these mesocosms where we're doing some modeling kind of in parallel to look at this. Okay, in terms of this particular equipment grant, we ordered, like I said, a couple of mesocosms from what we call mesocosms, they call them drainage and seepage tanks from Gunn, and they arrived in January, and we tested them out, and we're currently in the process of figuring out a number of important modifications to make. These have very specific teaching purposes, but they can be modified for our purposes to look at flow through these flow cells and look at the mixing between the groundwater flow paths and the surface water flow paths. Basically, you can envision putting sediment in there and then putting higher hydraulic head here and lower hydraulic head there, or basically water levels, higher water level here, lower water level there, and you get these flow paths induced in that, which kind of simulate these flow paths here. And the modifications we need to do, we need to add some upwelling groundwater, so water coming in from the groundwater, so add these lower flow paths to the system. And then we're in the process of figuring out which cameras to use to kind of take pictures of tracer dyes as they move through there, some post-processing scripts in MATLAB to process the images, and then think about the specific ports media that we want to use. So these are some of the details we're working now on, and we expect that the conservative tracer dye experiments will occur this coming summer. And we recently resubmitted a proposal to NSF to extend this work to abiotic reactions first, and then later microbially mediated reactions. And like I said before, we were coordinating this with some modeling, and here's some results of that too. You can kind of see another one of these flow cells here, and the tracer added to the bottom, and we can see a mixing zone between the two, and that's where we really expect reactions to occur. But what really controls how big that mixing zone is the first question. And again, this hasn't even been tackled in modeling before, let alone in the lab, let alone in the field. And so fundamentally, this is a new area of research where there's really nothing done out there yet. So we're starting at the very basic and looking at the mixing first, and then we'll build on the reactions later. So getting the quad chart. So basic highlights, the mesocosms were ordered in August last year. They arrived in January. I didn't realize they would take that long, but they are here, and we got them tested, and I've got a graduate student, like I said, working on developing the experimental methods, and we expect to do the first round of experiments this summer. In terms of publications coming out of this, there's nothing yet from the mesocosms themselves, but I have a student that's going to do a master's thesis, which we from the experiments from the summer, and we expect to publish that or submit that next summer in 2014. In the companion modeling study, that we already did the mixing part, and that was recently submitted to Water Resource Research, recently got the comments back, so that looks like it's accepted with revision. And then we're extending that to contaminant reactions, sort of a little bit ahead of the contaminant, or the mesocosm experiment, so the modeling will sort of help inform the mesocosm as we go along. So there'll be a paper coming out of that, and then certainly some conference talks were given as well. Funded projects, again, this was a resubmitted proposal. It did fairly well last time. We resubmitted it with a heavily revised, and hopefully we got a decent shot at it this time. And then key collaborators here, so Mark Widdowson, I don't think he's in the crowd, has been instrumental collaborator on both the Musicosm work and the modeling work. Darrell Scott will be helping out with the Musicosm study, and then Mandy Schreiber in Geosciences for the modeling study. And I haven't used it for full 4 minutes. I could take some questions. Am I way over?
I think we'll save the questions.
Okay.
Yeah, you took mine.
Did I?
Yeah.
Okay.
So write your questions down.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'm Tony Timpano. I'm representing Dr. Schoenholz's research group. This is where we're doing the ecosystem water focus. We've been working on this since about 2008, primarily in coal mine streams in Virginia and West Virginia. A number of folks involved in this project, both here at Virginia Tech and elsewhere. And just a little bit of background. Headwater streams are those little streams way up in the hills that really are the foundation biologically, hydrologically, and chemically for all of the waters downstream. And salinization of those freshwaters is a threat to aquatic resources and ecosystem services, both locally from issues such as Appalachian coal mining, which we've been studying, as well as the emerging use of hydraulic fracturing for getting at natural gas, and also globally from population change and climate change. All some of the issues that were on that top 10 list that Mark mentioned. So because of this, we need some better tools to protect and restore our aquatic resources and ecosystem services. The conceptual approach that we're working with here is that we know salinization is occurring, and we suspect that it leads to biodiversity decline, which then could likely lead to altered stream function or processes, which could then lead to ecosystem service loss. And it's a chain that can spiral out of control if left unchecked. So the main question that we're pursuing is, how does salinity affect headwater stream structure and function? And our main objective was to monitor the salinity to determine how it affects stream structure, in this case biodiversity, what organisms are present and in what numbers, and function or processes such as nutrient processing, for example. So far we've completed the first study, which is a structural response study based on discrete point-in-time sampling of the water quality or the salinity. And in this chart, you can see that we have biotic condition on the vertical axis, specific inductance of the water quality on the x-axis, and we see a decline in biodiversity or a decline in biotic condition as salinity increases. However, that relationship is quite variable, which leads us to the question, well, what else is contributing here? And that spawned a number of other studies, one of which is getting ramped up, one of which is nearing completion, and then this third study, which is also nearing completion, is the automated sensor continuous conductivity study. We take these little guys right here, these neat little sensors, and we put them in 27 streams throughout Virginia and West Virginia, and they sit there and record conductivity and temperature for us at 15-minute intervals, and this is what we get. So from August 2011 through March of 2012, we have a record of the conductivity of that water, and as you can see, it's highly variable. Both seasonally, we have a high peak in the fall and a low peak in the spring, but we also have dilution events throughout the year. And that's a big contrast to our prior study where we just measured that water quality once. So this technology allows us to get a better picture of what's really going on in the stream so that we can better characterize the potential threats to aquatic life. And that leads us to our future endeavors, which we hope to get at the functional response, stream processes such as nutrient processing, carbon processing, that sort of thing. We're in process of preparing some proposals for that to be submitted within the quarter, I believe. So a couple of the main highlights. We do know that increase in salinity leads to decreased biodiversity. We do know that continuous conductivity monitoring has shown us that it varies greatly with time. And through this research, we've supported 3 graduate students, 1 research associate, and about 12 undergraduates. Undergraduates really are indispensable. And we have proposals in preparation for submittal to a number of federal agencies. As far as publications, we have 3 refereed thus far, 1 in review, and 1 of which is in prep. We've presented in numerous proceedings, made a number of agency reports and trade publications, as well as quite a few presentations, about half of which were invited. As far as funding, we've got about almost $1 million into the various efforts among graduate students and research associates. And the key for success here to note is that we're actually advancing Clean Water Act implementation. Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy has already taken some of our initial research and implemented that into their policies. So it's having a real effect, hopefully for the better.
Next up. Reservoir water quality.
Okay, so I'm John Little, and I've been working with Adil Godrej, Tom Grizzard, Eric Hester, and Glenn Moglen on this Sustainable Watersheds initiative, let's say. And so you all know that up in the Occoquan watershed, they've got this fantastic system up there, decades worth of data, and so the idea was to kind of work with them and try and apply this kind of sustainable watersheds concept to that watershed. And so they have a model of the watershed and also models of the reservoirs in the watershed. So they've got this kind of coupled model, and the idea was to look at the effects of climate change and land use change and also population growth on this watershed system. And so building on that, we developed this WSC proposal, a $5 million proposal to NSF that we submitted in October 2011. And the basic idea was to sort of try and define a sustainability gap. Okay, so in the kind of conventional case, what we said we would do is look at BMPs, best management practices in the watershed, and we were focusing on nutrient management. So we said, okay, we'll optimize these BMPs with respect to cost and subject to regulatory constraints. So that's sort of the conventional case. And then we said, okay, now we're going to try and identify a kind of a sustainable case. So in order to do that, we had to come up with a sustainability sort of metric or indicator. So we came up with something, although it wasn't all that great, but we came up with something. So the idea then would be to optimize with respect to that sustainability metric. And so then we've got 2 optimized kind of solutions, and those 2 solutions basically identify this sustainability gap. And then once we've identified that, and we can kind of track it over time because we've got the climate projections and population projections and land use projections over time, we can look at how that gap will change over time, and then we can try and identify sustainable regulations that would try and sort of close that gap. So that was the concept that we submitted, and it was pretty well reviewed, but the reviewers kind of had some weaknesses that they identified, and I think they were good weaknesses. So one was we were a little bit weak on social science, and the other was our sustainability metric was a little bit fuzzy, which it was. And so, anyway, I challenge all of you to come up with a better sustainability metric. So that's where the proposal finished, and it's almost 2 years, but the next sort of solicitation is for September 2013, and so we're working to revise and resubmit. So along the way, we've been trying to kind of keep the momentum going, and so we also submitted a proposal to actually ICTAS and also the Water Research Foundation and the Water Quality Research Australia and Taiwan Water Corporation, and some of these people are involved in this the WSC proposal. And in this case, what we're doing is we're looking at the effect of climate change on water quality in reservoirs and how that affects water treatment. So it's sort of a subset of what we're looking at in this bigger proposal. So it sort of fits into that bigger concept, and it helps us build momentum and get understanding so we can improve the second version of this proposal. So this is a kind of funded project that we got. And then in addition, so we also invited Faye Duchin to come and give a New Horizons seminar. So she talked about the sustainable use of water, a framework for global analysis, and maybe many of you saw that presentation. So the thing I really like about Faye Duchin and what she's doing is that it's one of the few kind of quantitative approaches that I've seen to evaluating sustainability. I mean, I have to say, whenever I'm guilty of it myself, but whenever I see someone say sustainable transportation or sustainable this, you just know that there's no sort of a quantitative approach to allow people to say, whether this condition is better than this condition. It's just all, warm feelings at this point. So that's what I like about Faye, and also she's a really good social scientist, so she's a possible collaborator on our revised WC proposal. And then in addition, so after we got our reviews, Eric and I were kind of like taken aback. Okay, we understand that the sustainability metric is a little bit fuzzy, so we thought, right, we'll try and do something about it. So Eric had an undergrad, and he did a review of sort of metrics or indicators or measures of sustainability as applied to watersheds, and I kind of contributed to this paper. And we wrote this paper that was submitted to ES&T as a feature article. And what it does is it reviews the various frameworks for evaluating sustainability. So things like life cycle assessment and ecological footprint, and so what else? Water, energy flow analysis and things like that. And then we introduced this new one, which actually we think is maybe the best framework for evaluating sustainability in watersheds, which is system dynamics. Okay, and then we also reviewed all the sort of the metrics or indicators that have been used and are published in the literature, and Eric kind of categorized all those, so we think we now have a much better sort of handle on what metrics of sustainability in watersheds look like and what we might do to improve on that. So we haven't heard back from ES&T, but this is also going to contribute to this the next version of the proposal. And then lastly, I've been working with a student, Ryan Costello, and he's doing a master's project and report. It's a 6-credit project and report, so it's quite a big report. And what we're doing is looking at the use of system dynamics and how you can use that to evaluate sustainability of things like watersheds. So the idea is to use the system dynamics model and have indicators of sustainability in the model and orienters, and sort of try and match up the two to figure out whether it's sustainable or not. So we've been developing this approach, and that's also going to fit into the next version of the proposal. So I've just explained to you what we've been doing. We've got this one project, we've got this one submitted paper, and we've got these international collaborators. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Colin?
So we can just skip Eric's talk, the next one, right, and take his time. Is that right?
Let's try.
Is that okay with you, Eric? So I'm Cully Hessian. I'm from BSC, and I'm going to talk to you about the Stream Lab, which is downstream of us down here. Strubles Creek goes under the drill field, and then downstream of Tech, it goes on to the Virginia Tech Foundation property. And Tess Thompson and I did a restoration there in 2009, and since then we've kind of been turning this into an outdoor lab. And so, you can look at my collaborators. Right now, currently, there are 7 BSE people, 2 civils, 3 FREC, and 3 CSC people doing research out at the Stream Lab. And we also have a big NSFRU project, which they'll be coming back in a couple months, 10 more students. And they focus their research here, but we also look at the entire watershed because we're really trying to beef up the social systems research. So we have sociology and people in FREC that can help us kind of build that part of the research. We did some of that last year as well. So really, what I'm really big on is the watershed, the area that flows into the stream here, is basically Blacksburg and Virginia Tech. So it's kind of a pretty cool little laboratory that you can do all kinds of social research, although socially we're pretty strange. You know, we got this group that comes in every 4 years, and then we got the townies. I married one, so I can call them that. And then we got us who think we're really smart and stuff like that. So it's a very different social dynamic, but trying to understand that dynamic, how people understand streams, and how we can change that so that we can actually manage them better is what we're looking at. So our main focus is really promote interdisciplinary research. So just to put this in perspective, I pulled this off ICTAS website. You know, one of their focus areas or goals is to create places like this where we can do labs and you can do interdisciplinary research. In my mind, that's basically what I'm doing at the Stream Lab. And wow, that's a really slow timer. Let's do it again. There we go. So basically, I look at the Stream Lab as like an ICTAS building. So there's this lab out there. We have all this infrastructure out there. We have sampling bridges, the red ones. We have groundwater wells with sensors. We even have some of your little toys in there to look at groundwater, surface water interaction. We have a full weather station, lets us do evapotranspiration calculations. We also have flow measurements. We have in-stream velocity meters and lots of stuff. Pictures every hour, and all this goes on the website and updates every hour so that you can kind of look at the data. And it's all wireless. It goes to an antenna here and then shoots to our building off here. So it's all kind of updated hourly in our database, and then some of the data goes online hourly. And I just want to, obviously we're not going to read all this, but there's a lot of stuff going on out there. Eric Hester's used it a couple times, you know, for his MAC reports. He got one student looking at hydraulic modeling of some of the restoration practices we did. Darrell Scott's out there doing work there. Actually, next Friday, we'll be running a flood through the floodplain here. We create our own floods so that we can measure nutrient uptake and hydraulic interactions. So there's a lot of cool stuff going out here. So I look at it more like we're building kind of this infrastructure that people can go out there and use for labs. And also, I mean, for research, but also for teaching. We've used it for, I think I'm up to 16 classes now. From like 5 different departments and 4 different colleges have used it for labs or whatever they want to use. And the data's there, so they can always use the data if you just want to, if you're teaching a class and you need a hydrograph, we can give you a hydrograph. And we're doing some pretty cool cutting edge research out there as well. In the future, one of my main things really is this NSF REU program has been really cool, and it has a big social component, and it's truly interdisciplinary. So we bring 10 students from 5 different disciplines, and then they get in interdisciplinary groups and do research. So if there's one group doing ARG research, there might be an engineer that's focused more on sediment transport. There might be a biologist that's more microbiology and really looking at antibiotic resistant gene. But there also might be a political science major or something that's really is going to be looking at, okay, how do people care about this? Do they understand this? If they did, what would it change how we do our policies, things like that. So that's been really cool, and we're going to write NSF proposals kind of to bring that up to a bigger scale. And so if you're familiar with the Simpsons movies, so this is when they put the dome over Springfield. I'm dropping this dome over the watershed for Strubles Creek, which is basically Blacksburg and Virginia Tech. And we want to understand everything that's going on in here in terms of energy flows, nutrient flows, social activity, things like that. There's too much information here to go through, but you can read that on your own.
All right, thank you very much. Andy?
Well, I'll be brief. All right, so thank you very much for supporting our work. We looked at the unanticipated consequences of green building. As you may know, green building has really taken off. There's a lot of initiatives in the marketplace and also in policy to promote it. But we're starting to see anecdotally some unanticipated consequences in water systems. that have resulted from combining new commercial off-the-shelf technologies in novel ways, and then putting people in charge of managing them that don't know anything about them, don't really care, et cetera, et cetera. So we received a grant to try to figure out what would be the best way to use existing data to understand what's going on in these buildings. So we wanted to document what the range of problems that people are experiencing as a result of unintentionally, as a result of trying to be green, and ultimately, we're working toward figuring out ways in which we can design green buildings in a more effective way. Okay, so mainly we wanted to inventory green projects and see what was going on out there, determining what problems people were having, and then also start to explore some existing sources of data that we could tap in future funding to really start to understand this problem. So one of the things we did was a survey, and this is an outcome. It's a master's thesis that's being finished up right now, but this national survey showed that these sorts of problems are happening in green building right now. And so what's interesting for us then is to try to start to understand why that's happening and how we can prevent it. So we're learning about new types of failure modes that we don't presently take into account when we're designing. And ultimately, we're trying to figure out ways that we can design around those, design to avoid them. So what's in process now, I'll show you on the next slide. We've had some follow-on funding as a result of this. And using that funding, we've moved into detailed interviews with people who are responsible for portfolios of facilities to try to dig a little bit deeper. This summer, we hope to be doing some case studies with site visits. And we're also working on how this can all be adapted into guidelines and training to actually try to change the industry, to change ways in which people operate. So here's our quad chart. We have had, a couple of publications are underway. As I said, we've got a thesis that should be finishing out this semester or summer one that will have two refereed papers. We've also got a national report that's been published by the U.S. Green Building Council to talk about what we found in some of their databases. And we're building this database of green projects that we, again, will be using as a foundation for future work. Let's see what else. So we've had 2 follow-on projects with this. Collaborators are Mark Edwards and Amy Pruden, and we're grateful that this funding has led to that. And we've also made a lot of contacts with people out there in the industry, again, that we're going to be drawing upon as we continue this work and continue to develop it. So with that, I'll hand it back off to Amy.
Okay, so just to wrap up, so this has been focusing on our core water sustainability thrust activities and where we've invested. And so hopefully we've made a strong case that water sustainability truly is an interdisciplinary problem and requires interdisciplinary solutions. So we've focused on junior faculty, the STREAM Lab. We've looked at faculty buyout and inter-thrust collaboration, which I talked a little bit about on Monday. And some key successes, the STREAM Lab has really been an epicenter for interdisciplinary water research. As Annie just mentioned, the Green Buildings Project led to an Alfred P. Sloan Foundation grant and several Water Research Foundation grants. And things that we're going after, as John Little mentioned, I think we're really positioned well for one of the water science and climate grants from National Science Foundation. And Andrea will be presenting later on some of the activities that are leading to NSF IGERT, and that's currently in review, and we're on the edge of our seats to see what happens with that. And also at the institutional level, I think there's really this awakening of how important water is, and so you might have heard that there's going to be a water cluster hire across campus, so we're keeping an eye on that to see how we can get them involved. So there's a call for 7 assistant professors, so if you all can get the word out that we're recruiting, and that's the website. And also wanted to mention within civil and environmental engineering, many of you know I chaired a search committee and Mark was on the committee, and many of you helped and met with candidates, and I'm happy to announce that we did just hire a new faculty member. His name is Zhen He, and he'll be joining us from University of Wisconsin, and he focuses on taking polluted water waste streams and harvesting energy, so he's going to be a great fit with this thrust. So I realize we're a couple minutes off schedule. I can shorten my bit a little bit later. Maybe Eric doesn't mind shortening his by a couple minutes since we just heard from him, because I think it's important to address any questions you may have. Yep.
This is on the talks from Tony and maybe Eric. So we were talking about how does salinity affect upstairs stream function and all that. So when you talk about stream function, are you talking about solving Navier-Stokes equation and species transport equation to see how salinity affect the stream function? Or stream function is in the civil engineering sense, not in the mechanical engineering sense?
Yes, it's in the ecological sense of stream processes. Basically, just measuring matter changes and transport over time, carbon, nutrients, biotic interactions, those sorts of things. Things that ultimately lead to downstream ecosystem services.
But is there, in general, we do all these problems in mechanical engineering, for example. We saw the Navier-Stokes equation, we saw the species transport equation, and we can get exactly, the isosalinity curves, isospecies curves. So that's not something that we follow up in civil engineering.
Maybe it is.
It might be something to think about.
Maybe
Eric
I can
is.
say something here. I'm probably one of the few people who's both an engineer and ecologist, and so I understand the Navier-Stokes equation, but I also understand structure and function. And certainly ecologists and engineers think very, very differently, so that's one key thing there. But I'm guessing at the level that DuPont is working, the Navier-Stokes equation probably is a little bit too detailed, a little bit too focused on, turbulence exposure, that sort of thing, and small scale flow process, whereas he's probably looking at the stream overall, sort of overall kind of more long-term concentrations, because biological systems tend to integrate those things over time. And so I think there's probably a scale disconnect between those two pieces.
That's a good point.
That's worth discussing.
Yeah, we're looking much larger scale, I believe, if I understand that interpretation correctly.
Well, maybe we can discuss this offline, because I think there might be room for bringing in real modeling so that we can get all the curves and the experimental data can then just sort of validate that, and then you use your model to predict everything, whether it's the species carbon transport or it is the salt concentration or whatever.
Yeah.
So, something to think about.
So we
there are supporters
have done like habitat modeling, so we do a lot of that, but it's very three-dimensional hydraulic modeling, and we're at a different scale though. So we're at a small reach scale. We're looking at trout habitat and what they like and what they don't like. So we do some of that, and you're right. I think it is the scale. It'd be really hard to do it.
But we do scales from very, very nano scale to the eddy scale, large eddy scale. So anyways, something to think about.
I'd be excited to get a seed grant idea from you.
And we're talking about sustainability metric. So what is the sustainability metric? Can somebody define that?
I would say no one knows.
But I know,
would
you
say-
said that,
So I would say no one knows, and that's what So the current state of the art for sustainability is life cycle assessment. That's sort of what the engineers like anyway, life cycle assessment. But this doesn't tell you about sustainability. This tells you about one process or one product. And you can kind of compare processes or products based on their energy and material and energy flows and environmental impact. But it doesn't tell you about the sort of the true sustainability of those systems.
What is the definition you're using? When you talk the gap analysis, and all that.
Well, I mean, so I would say there is no kind of clear definition. So, how do you decide whether a watershed is sustainable? I would say that no one knows.
If you do carbon footprint or you do water footprint, a bunch of other things, you get different answers as to which of those two watersheds is more sustainable. So that's kind of where the debate is.
But there's two other keys, and that's the economic and social. So it's always a three-pronged.
Yeah, of course, that's exactly.
So we
that's
get
exactly
outside
the point.
estimates,
That's
always
exactly the
the other two prongs of it.
So there's lots of answers. The question is which is most important, I guess.
Or which is the one we are going to use.
So I think it has to ultimately.
So that's kind of what Eric and I were doing with this review paper. We looked at the various frameworks, we looked at the various sort of metrics that are being used, and we say, well, no one really seems to know, but we're interested in using the system dynamics approach, and there's something that I found in the literature where you define indicators. You have a model of the system, basically. You define indicators at various points in this system, and then you have these orienters, which are sort of higher level, some are true sustainability criteria, and then you sort of simulate the system and you try and match the indicators with the orienters, and when they do match, then you say, okay, in that case, it's sustainable. So that's kind of like the approach that we are wanting to apply to watersheds, and probably it can apply to lots of other systems.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see. So we have to come up with some definition that we all agree on, at least locally.
Why can't we have a black swan on this route?
Well, there are.
I mean, we black swan, bring it, like you said, sustainability for watersheds for others, but the big picture, what does sustainability mean to you?
So you could all read our paper that
but there's a company in Cincinnati on sustainability. Anyway, I think it is something we should sort of put our hands around.
All right.
Okay, so we will bring Eric Hester back on stage.
All right, well, thank you again. I'm a little self-conscious coming up here twice, and then my name is mentioned a lot of times in between, but of course, thank you for all the support from ICTAS. Okay, so this was a junior faculty category grant, 2-year grant, helping streams help themselves. And I have to give Cully the credit for this name. I'm not very good with titles, but Cully's much better at that. Anyway, just kind of big picture, the water sustainability, if nothing else, is certainly involved in sustainable supply, and supply is typically a water quantity question, but water quality obviously comes into play, because if you pollute water, then it may not be available for the use that you want. And so this, similar to my other talk, is focused on water quality. And a lot of my research focuses on surface water and groundwater. You have to really think about both in order to really sustainably manage water. Okay. And again, a good chunk of my work is focused at this interface, which tends to be highly reactive relative to surface water above it and deeper groundwater below. In the interest of time, I'll move on instead of going into more detail on that. But in terms of kind of relevant efforts going on in my research group on this topic, a related grant that we have from NSF is actually looking at the effect of stream restoration on water quality, and this is a big issue, particularly in Virginia, where the TMDL for Chesapeake Bay came out a year or so ago, and maybe 2 years now, and states are trying to figure out, well, what are we actually going to do? And I saw recent guidance come out related to that, where they were saying, well, stream restoration is potentially a good practice for removing or cycling nutrients and reducing their availability, et cetera. But when I was reading that report, they actually even had some quantitative metrics about, well, if you do this, this much exchange will happen, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't think the science actually connects that. There's sort of ahead of the policy is kind of getting ahead of the science. And so we're really trying to add some real data to this, looking at both in-stream structures, which is very common practice, but also floodplain reconnection. And both of those things can, in theory, increase reactions, but don't always. And so where and when do they really have an effect? And that's the question. So the junior faculty category grant from ICTAS, we're finishing up the second year of this right now. It's focused just on hyperreach zones, so we didn't do floodplain stuff for this. The existing hyperreach zone paradigm is that you're talking about continuous sediment beneath and adjacent streams. And in fact, that's the paradigm that I used in my previous talk, but we've been finding out more and more that there's preferential flow, and very often you get these pipes going into the sediment. Basically, they're called macropores, and our thought is that they can either enhance or short-circuit these reactions, depending on what's going on, but they really haven't been studied at all, and so this is what we're looking at with this ICTAS grant, and our objectives were to basically, again, very little is known, so just go out and find out where these things are, how common they are, some basic measurements of their size, et cetera, so get a handle on what they are and where they are. Then start to get at the function, so how often are they actually engaged? These tend to be more on the banks than in the bed, and so of streams and rivers, and so it tends to be during storms when flow comes up, particularly when nutrients are high or contaminants are high, that the water moves into the bank and comes back out, and so that tends to be when we think when they're going to be most effective, and then actually start to measure some of the hydraulic effects of these things. We aren't going to get to water quality until subsequent grants, but this was the first step. And then test a new method for tracking flow in these things, because one of the hardest problems with groundwater in general is figuring out where things are going. And so this electrical resistivity imaging technique is a kind of a geophysical technique, and if you apply a salt tracer, you can actually start to see where things are going, and I'll show an image of that in a second. Our approach was, at least in terms of figuring out where and when these macropores were, was a field survey. We did 5 streams, and we did various survey data to figure out, you characterize the shape of the bed and the banks, and you run a model through here, and you have a time series of flows that we get from a stage gauge, and you can figure out how often these macropores are engaged. So that would address objective 3. And then at one of those 5 streams, we installed 2 series of groundwater wells or piezometers that go back from the bank. So this is the river here, the stream. And basically, this is a kind of a classical experiment where the bank's sections were identical, other than one had a lot of macropores, one didn't. Sort of test those differences. We're still collecting data now. These first 3 bullets are from this current year. And then last year, earlier, we already did the ERI application with and without an experimental macropore. And you can see an image of ERI here. It's kind of hard to see that, but basically you have a bunch of electrodes and you shoot electricity into the ground at different times and places and measure it at the same time at other times and places. And if you do this, you can kind of stitch together an image. And why don't I start with that down here? You can stitch together an image of where your salt tracer is, and in this case it's the black areas, the darker areas, and then the areas that are lighter are the areas without it. And so you can get this 2-dimensional, even sometimes 3-dimensional image that mood changes over time, and it's a great advance over what is already typically done in these environments. Okay, and then in terms of student-supported, Derek Minikino basically wound up getting 2, I think, full chapters of his dissertation, so a good chunk of his dissertation was supported by this. And then David Asenhere, another student, kind of helped him out with some of this field work some of the time. Okay. So key results, I can't really go through all these graphs in the interest of time, but basically we found out that macropores are large and they're common, and we've got some data about their distribution in space. They're mostly engaged during storms, and we have this sort of flow duration curve or flow engagement curve, if you will, which shows as you increase the stream discharge or stage, you increase the number of macropores that are engaged, and that's kind of intuitive, but we have data to show that now. And then they significantly enhance bank storage, which is this flow or communication into the bed, or into the banks, the floodplain, riparian zone. And we've got data to show that as well. But in the interest of time, I'll skip the details of that. And then again, the ERI was successful at tracking flows. So we've got some images like this over time as salt tracer is moving through these flow paths. Future research, we want to extend this by doing some modeling of these bank storage transects. Currently, we're only doing the analysis of the field data, but I think modeling would allow us to vary a lot of other parameters. Analysis of electrical conductivity and temperature data. So I didn't mention that, but we also have electrical conductivity and temperature data from those transects, which tell us other things about solute movement and effects on pollutant mitigation itself. We would start with modeling and head into the field later, and those are subject of another grant application. We submitted this last year, got pretty good reviews, and so we're going to resubmit that this year, meaning this coming June, and I'll have a full additional year of test-funded preliminary data, so I think we have a good shot at that one as well. And then the quad chart. So the highlights, I think we already went through these, but so the macropores are common, have substantial effect on bank storage, which is a kind of hyporheic exchange. They likely have a substantial effect on pollutant cleansing capabilities, either helping or hurting, but we need follow-on support to do that, and that's what the NSF grant would do. And then ERIs can successfully track flow macropores, so that was also determined. In terms of publications, we've already got the ERI work publication, that's already published online in Hydrological Processes. And then the current year's work, which is the field survey and the transects of piezometers and that sort of thing, that will be part of an invited special issue of Freshwater Science that relates to hyporheic and surface water groundwater exchange in general sense. At least one manuscript will come out of that, possibly two. There's a lot of data coming from this study. And those will be submitted in the fall, and then a couple conference presentations as well. And I already mentioned this, there's an existing NSF grant related to this, and then follow-on one that we will be resubmitting soon. In terms of collaborators, I know a lot about ERI, but I'm not an expert of all the details, and so I had more to. Iowa's been helping with that, and Tom Burby here at Virginia Tech will be kind of taking over that role, trying to get some local assistance with that. And then Cully Hession, of course, has been around as the general mentor of the whole. All right, thank you very much.